Welcome back to our studios here in Lahore. I'm Hamza Amjad, and let's start the bulletin with Syria, where 14 civilians have been killed in airstrikes in the northwestern Idlib province. 6 children are among those killed. Now, monitors say regime and Russian forces attacked an informal camp of displaced Syrians. 3 civilians were also killed by artillery fire in the northern Hama province. A UK-based watchdog said government forces and their allies have killed over 600 people in Idlib over the past few weeks. Moving on to Afghanistan, where 4 security forces personnel have been killed in a gun attack on a hotel in western Badghis. The leader of the provincial council says 10 others were wounded. Elsewhere in the country, NATO says a US service member has been killed in action. Meanwhile, the Taliban have claimed responsibility, saying they have blown up an American tank in the Saeed Abad district of Wardak province. The insurgents say 2 US invaders were killed and 3 wounded. 2 US troops were killed in the same area last month in another Taliban-claimed attack. While the US, Pakistan, China and Russia have called for a comprehensive and permanent ceasefire in Afghanistan. This obviously follows the recent intra-Afghan talks and another round of negotiations between the US and Taliban in Qatar. In a joint statement after a meeting in Beijing, envoys of the 4 countries pushed for direct talks between the Afghan government and Taliban insurgents. They said the dialogue should be Afghan-led and lead to a peace framework as soon as possible. The 4 envoys emphasized the importance of their consensus on the Afghan peace process, which was agreed in April. In Iraq, 9 ISIS militants have been killed in an airstrike by the US-led coalition in the northern Nineveh province. The Iraqi military said a militant hideout was destroyed in the raid. It said ISIS fighters were preparing for attacks against military and civilian targets. In Yemen, 10 Houthi rebels have been killed in a government assault on their bases in the central province of Al-Baida. 7 government soldiers were also killed amid intense fighting for control of the mountainous territory. The battles continue to rage in the region. Let's move on now to Somalia, where 26 people, including 2 journalists, have been killed and 54 others wounded in a terrorist attack in southern Somalia. Witnesses said gunmen stormed a hotel building near the port of Kismayo after detonating a car bomb at its entrance. Regional politicians were holding a meeting inside the hotel at the time. The terrorist group Al-Shabaab has claimed responsibility for the attack. Now, the militant group has been fighting the Somali government for more than a decade. Israeli forces have wounded 34 Palestinians during weekly protests along the Gaza border. Palestine's health ministry says Israeli troops fired live ammunition and rubber bullets at the protesters. The ministry says a 10-year child is in critical condition after being shot in the head. The demonstrations call for Israel to lift its blockade of the Gaza Strip. Officials state that over 300 Palestinians have been killed since the start of weekly protests last year. Turkey has received a second shipment of parts for a Russian air defense system amid strained ties with NATO partners. The first shipment arrived on Friday. The defense minister, Hulusi Akar, says the purchase of the Russian missile system does not change Turkey's strategic orientation. Akar told his US counterpart, Mark Esper, that Ankara is still assessing a bid to acquire the US Patriot air defense systems. The US has threatened to expel Ankara from the F-35 jet program over the purchase of the Russian missile system. Now, Washington argues that the S-400 is incompatible with NATO's defense network and could compromise the F-35 program. Pakistan and India are set to hold the second round of talks on the Kartarpur corridor tomorrow at the Wagah border complex. Officials from both countries will finalize the modalities of the corridor. Foreign Office spokesperson Dr. Mohammad Faisal will lead the Pakistani delegation. A number of key issues, including infrastructure, the pilgrims' movement and safety, will be discussed. Work on the corridor is expected to be completed by October the 31st, before the 550th birth anniversary of Baba Guru Nanak. The corridor will connect the Darbar Sahib in Pakistan's Kartarpur with the Dera Baba Nanak shrine in India's Gurdaspur district. It will facilitate the visa-free movement of Indian Sikh pilgrims. Moving on, the police in Gibraltar say 4 crew members of a seized Iranian tanker have been released on bail without charge. The 4 Indian nationals were arrested earlier this week after their vessel was detained on suspicion of smuggling oil to Syria. Police say the crewmen were released unconditionally, but the tanker will remain in detention as investigations are underway. Earlier, Gibraltar's Chief Minister, Fabian Picardo, claimed that the vessel breached European sanctions in Syria. Britain's Royal Marines seized the ship last week, allegedly at the request of the US government. Well, floods and landslides triggered by torrential monsoon storms have killed 40 people across South Asia in the last 2 days. The monsoon, which runs from June to September, causes widespread death and destruction every year. In Nepal, 27 people died after torrential rains hit the east and south of the country. 11 others have been killed in India's northeastern states of Assam and Arunachal Pradesh. Heavy rains in Bangladesh claimed 2 more lives. Authorities in Pakistan have also issued a flood alert for several cities as the monsoon season began in the country. Last year's monsoon caused the deaths of over 1,200 people across South Asia. 51 people have been injured after a 5.8 magnitude earthquake struck the southern Philippines. Police officials said the tremor was felt at 4 neighboring towns in Mindanao, where it damaged homes, churches and other buildings. The Philippines is part of the so-called Ring of Fire in the Western Pacific, notorious for intense seismic activity. The southern Japanese island of Okinawa has also been hit by an earthquake recorded at 6.1 on the Richter scale. There are no immediate reports of damage or casualties. Let's go now to Hawaii, where the state government has declared an emergency on Maui Island, where wildfires have forced the evacuation of thousands of residents. Shelters were set up in nearby areas to accommodate displaced people. Officials say winds of up to 20 miles per hour fanned the flames, helping the fires to spread. Now, the state government says firefighters are working to contain the blaze. Well, America's National Hurricane Center has warned millions of residents in Louisiana to brace for impact from the tropical storm Barry. The southern U.S. state and its largest city of New Orleans are threatened with potentially disastrous rainfall and flooding.
Officials forecast the storm will reach hurricane status and roar ashore along the state's central coast. Earlier, it packed winds of 65 miles per hour. Officials ramped up evacuations, airlines cancelled flights, and floodgates were slammed shut in preparation.
We have rescue, and our fire department's trained in rescue. A lot of our firemen have rescue certifications for rescue boats. We have, our sheriff's office has rescue boats. Katrina taught us a big lesson. Katrina taught us that we needed more high water vehicles. Our sheriff's office phased out Crown Victorias and all, for the most part, and now they're in Ford Explorers because they're higher.
Barry will be classified a hurricane once sustained winds hit 74 miles per hour.
Now, immigrants in America fear more insecurity and displacement ahead of nationwide raids from Sunday. Washington is launching a sweeping deportation operation as a part of its crackdown on undocumented migrants.
In a bid to discourage a surge of Central American migrants into the U.S., the Trump administration has announced a nationwide wave of arrests. The raids will target families who are subject to deportation orders by the courts but have not yet left the country.
I'm glad to be what I am, but it also hurts me that other people their families get broken like Lego pieces.
More than 2,000 immigrants will be affected in the crackdown, and the specter of separation haunts them. The struggle to survive was not over for migrants when they escaped oppression and poverty in their own countries to seek refuge in the United States. Now more persecution awaits them. Family members who are arrested together may be held in family detention centers. Thousands rallied across the U.S.-Mexico border to protest against the centers and deportations. The raids will reportedly take place in 10 cities across the United States. New York, San Francisco, and Chicago are among the cities set to be on the list.
Well, speaking of migrants, hundreds of undocumented African migrants have stormed the Pantheon in Paris to demand the right to remain in France. The protesters demanded negotiations with Prime Minister Edouard Philippe over their immigration status. Now, police intervened and removed the peaceful protesters from the National Monument. The West African protesters call themselves the Black Vests, a reference to the anti-government Yellow Vest movement. In New Zealand, citizens have handed in hundreds of prohibited weapons to the police under the government's gun buyback scheme. The arrangement aims to rid the country of semi-automatic weapons in the wake of terrorist attacks on the Christchurch mosques.
Police said that they paid about $200,000 to dozens of gun owners within hours of staging the first buyback event. It was held just a few kilometers away from the Christchurch mosques, where 51 Muslims were gunned down last March. The government said $208 million have been allocated for the scheme. Police officials said the first buyback event has been a huge success.
There was people queuing up at 8:30 this morning for a 10 o'clock opening. We opened early to facilitate the public coming in, and they've gone right through to past 3 o'clock today. So the engagement with the public or from the firearms public in Canterbury has been stunning.
258 such collection events will be held across New Zealand over the next 3 years. New Zealand's parliament enacted gun reforms last April. The new law has banned the circulation and use of most semi-automatic firearms and some shotguns.
Conservationists have warned that sharks are at a risk of disappearing from the Mediterranean Sea. Overfishing and plastic pollution are already choking marine wildlife. The World Wildlife Fund, or the WWF, says more than half of shark and ray species in the Mediterranean are under threat. It warns that almost a third of them have been fished to the brink of extinction. The WWF says it is nearly impossible to monitor conservation efforts due to a lack of international cooperation and regulation. A report released ahead of the Shark Awareness Day singles out Libya and Tunisia as the worst culprits. Sharks have been around for over more than 400 million years and are particularly vulnerable to population decline due to slow maturation. Well, the Sweet Art Museum has opened its doors to the public in Brazil. The museum is a delight for social media fanatics with its colorful and dreamy displays of giant ice cream and all things sweet. More in this report.
For a generation obsessed with selfies and social media, Carla Santos has opened the perfect museum, which aims to tour around the world. The Sweet Art Museum draws inspiration from the colorful world of Instagram. Dedicated to spreading happiness, the museum is a world of art and fantasy with exclusive surprises.
What is part of our childhood? The sweets, isn't it? Then our creative concept was based on exposing a type of candy in each room and telling their story. In addition, sweets have very striking colors.
The museum is filled with fake giant-sized candies. It also includes a pool full of fake marshmallows for visitors to dive into. The founders have ensured that the giant candies smell just like the real ones to awaken childhood memories related to all things sweet.
All the people of the world aspire to be happy, and in reality, in our day-to-day, it is wonderful to have the opportunity to visit a space like this, where it is impossible to enter and leave without a smile on your face.
This experience-based museum offers just a right amount of nostalgia, amusement and laughter to visitors, and that too without anyone getting fatter.
Well, I wouldn't mind jumping into that pool of marshmallows myself, but Bolivian musical maestro Ernesto Cavor is making sound waves in the Andean nation with his unique musical inventions. He is best known for mashing up a charango guitar with the panpipe, but that is not only his only invention, as we see in this report.
In a world where technology addiction runs rampant, traditional music has lost its importance. Bolivian Ernesto Cavor is one of the few keeping a rich tradition alive. Dubbed the world's best charango player, Cavor has turned the traditional stringed instrument on its head. He has also invented instruments like the muyu muyu and arpinola.
I have many instruments that I have invented. As you have seen, the most important ones are the Miu Miu guitar, which represents the world. The zampona has 3 rows, 2 rows.
De 3 filas, de 2 filas.
The self-taught maestro discovered music in his teens when he enrolled in a dance class to overcome shyness. The dancing didn't stick, but Cavor developed a passion for sound and the charango.
Being self-taught for me means learning by watching, listening and enjoying. That's what I did. A long time ago, I learned to play the guitar. That is my strength.
Cavor's exhibition in La Paz is winning over a new generation of fans with its unique musical stylings.
Well, interestingly, some of the world's most expensive salt is still collected by hand in a marshy corner of western France. The salt collecting technique has been passed down through generations for over 1,000 years. Let's take a look.
Some people watch their dreams evaporate, but some make a living from evaporation. The French town of Guérande is making its money by evaporating seawater to make salt crystals. At least 380 salt farmers work in the fields with labor-intensive practices, which explains the high price tag.
The technique for managing the water is the same, used by the people who created the salt ponds. I'm proud that this craft is still alive.
The marshes are a popular tourist attraction, bringing in 80,000 visitors a year to watch the farmers work.
We're from around here, so we try to mostly buy local. It's the main reason, giving work to the local producers.
Farmers use traditional tools to get the salt, harvesting 2 tons of it a day. Each year, 2.5 million euros worth of Guérande salt is sold in 55 countries.
Welcome back, and now let's begin with the business news. Wall Street stocks climbed to record highs this week over optimism that US interest rates could be cut later this month. Major US indices have gained 2.4% so far in July, adding to major gains in June. The broad-based S&P 500 closed above the 3,000 mark for the first time. For the week, the Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 1.5%, while the tech-heavy Nasdaq added 1%. However, European bourses closed flat as investors reacted negatively to new Chinese trade data and Eurozone industrial production figures. Oil prices also rose this week, with US crude jumping 4.5%. Well, Facebook continues to struggle as it bounces from scandal to scandal. The US Federal Trade Commission has approved a $5 billion settlement over the sharing of data with Cambridge Analytica. Allegedly, the company had shared information belonging to 87 million people with the defunct British consultancy firm. More in this report.
Facebook is hardly a stranger to controversy. The company has been rocked by several allegations of unethical behavior over the past year. The tech firm is being probed by the US FTC over the alleged mishandling of data belonging to 87 million people.
Now look, I get that a lot of people aren't sure that we're serious about this. I know that we don't exactly have the strongest reputation on privacy right now, to put it lightly.
This week, authorities approved a fine amounting to roughly $5 billion. Facebook had already set aside $3 billion in anticipation of such a move.
As the world gets bigger and more connected, we need that sense of intimacy more than ever. So that's why I believe that the future.
Despite recent setbacks, Facebook continues to be a major social media platform and also owns WhatsApp and Instagram. Its shares rose in value by 1.8% following the announcement of the fine.
Pakistan will set up a China-Pakistan Economic Corridor Authority to oversee the quick and focused completion of projects. The Minister for Planning and Development here in Pakistan, Khusro Bakhtiar, says that CPEC is about to enter its second phase. Bakhtiar says Islamabad and Beijing have decided to establish a Pakistan-China Business Council to include the private sector in the CPEC projects. He says the chairman of the National Development Reform Commission of China will visit Pakistan in October. Negotiations between US and Indian trade representatives in New Delhi have ended without any progress on a dispute over tariffs. Indian officials say discussions on key issues have been put off until Indian Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal's visit to Washington for more talks next month. In a short statement, the Indian government said the two countries agreed to continue their discussions on differences ranging from tariffs to market access. Earlier, President Donald Trump said that Indian tariffs on US goods are unacceptable. And let's have a look at the weather around the world. Well, that was all I have from the news bulletin at the moment, but stay tuned to Indus News. I'll be back in about 10 minutes with your news headlines, and as always, thanks for watching.